Time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Hey, Craig, I'd like to start with you this morning. As you know, there has been an unprecedented surge at the U.S.-Mexican border where thousands of people, many of them unaccompanied children, are seeking asylum under the impression that the new Biden administration would be welcoming them. Isn't this the kind of thing that former President Trump has been warning us could happen? And what are the political consequences for Democrats if this turns into a major crisis?
Before I respond, let me just say that I'm sitting in front of an image that the spy is utilizing as part of the spring Keep the Spies Spying fundraising drive. And while Al and I do this for free because we enjoy the weekly visit, it does take a small but mighty team of people at the Spy to produce these publications every single day of the week. So if you like what you see, like what you hear from us, click on that link and send a little bit of money to the Spy, and they'll keep spying and we'll keep talking. With regard to immigration, I'm sure Al feels the same way, that for all the issues that we've been involved in and engaged with, this is one of the most intractable, and mainly because it's not one issue. It's a very complex set of challenges. The Biden administration is, I think, quite forthrightly trying to put forward solutions, not because they have the magic bullet that's going to pass the Congress quickly, but to get the dialogue going. I mean, there is a spike, although the interesting thing to me in looking at the spike of immigrants headed this way and crossing the border is that it doesn't involve as many families as the spike in 2019, when, of course, we had the wall and we had President Trump in office. The numbers are approaching what we saw in 2019, and it will be a high for sure. But there were more families in 2019. Now you have people who are coming here seeking work, hoping for an opportunity, because conditions are so bad on the other side of the border, and they are risking their lives to get here. So you have an issue on the other side of the border, and part of the Biden effort has been to address some of the foreign assistance that might help that to some extent. You have actually rhetoric from both sides that I think is not particularly helpful. Putting all your eggs into the wall is already demonstrated not to be successful, and certainly a portion of a wall has no real promise to halt this flow. But there are Republicans who are simply picking up the rhetoric of the past and calling for more barriers to immigration to prevent people from crossing. Children, I think we all are compassionate and see photographs of young people being detained and cringe at those images, and that's becoming a greater challenge along the border. I actually think, just while laying out a lot of issues without solutions, I think that there's going to have to be a series of measures passed over time. Two measures that are being debated this week in the Congress, actually in the House, actually both passed the House last year with some Republican votes, but the Senate didn't pick them up. Senator Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, is working with Senate Republicans on trying to find something that could get through. It's unlikely the two bills, if they pass the Democratic House this week, would get through the Senate. So it's going to take a masterful amount of political will to really find a middle ground. This is a policy that's going to require some kind of bipartisan solution, and it may be around finding a path forward for the 11 million people who are now immigrants that are now in this country illegally, a path forward to help them secure a future as a citizen is something around which I think people rally, and actually the American business community needs the workers. These are people are all part of the fabric now of our workforce and our society, and they're needed. So I'm hopeful that we can step up to that issue, and also certainly step up to what are called the dreamers, the young people coming across, and find a path forward for them.
Al, is there a crisis at the border?
I don't think there's a crisis at the border yet. Uh, uh, and to go back to your original question, first of all, I agree with Craig on two things. People ought to support the spy. That's most important. But secondly, I basically agree with his analysis of the immigration issue. It's been a very complicated issue. We've been up and down this path of trying to, until Trump, every president on both parties has really tried to deal with it. And it's just a very difficult and complicated issue. To your original question of political consequences, I don't think there are going to be any political consequences on the Democrats unless, 18 months from now, this is really a burning crisis. And even then, if it is, we can't make any judgments now on how the politics will play. I think a lot of these problems are caused by what Craig alluded to with Trump and his wall, but really 4 years of what I would call, and I'd use this term, very particularly anti-American immigration policies that Trump pushed. The Republicans are jumping all over this issue now because, to be honest, they're looking for diversions wherever they get it. They don't want to talk about what Biden's done to get the country vaccinated after Trump failed. They don't want to talk about the recovery plan because they didn't vote for it. So this week, Kevin McCarthy was at the southern border. Last week, he was reading Dr. Seuss on the House floor. I mean, any kind of diversion he can have. The Republicans have tried this anti-immigration strategy before. Remember the caravan in 2018, and it worked well for them. The Democrats retook the House, and Democrats got more votes, cumulative votes for the Congress than they've ever won in a midterm. But what I'd like to address for just a second, this immigration issue is part of I think, a larger issue that is other than COVID and life and death, really the central issue facing the country now. And in the campaign, President Biden said this is going to be a fight for the soul of the country. And I really think we are in a battle for the soul of our country, a battle over what kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be, as we always been, a nation of immigrants in the world's greatest democracy? Or do we want to become xenophobic, anti-immigrant, anti-democratic, that kind of a country? Now, we've gone through this choice before in the 1850s and 1860s. Republican Party actually let us out of the problems in the 1860s, and also in the 1960s, where with a bipartisan effort, we declared that we wanted to be a democratic country, small d. But right now, I mean, the Republicans sort of deteriorated, the Donald Trump Republicans deteriorated to the modern know-nothings, railing against immigration, trying to make it more difficult for people to vote, people of color to vote. They've got, 250 bills in state legislatures to suppress the vote, screaming about non-existent voter fraud. To me, that's not the America that I know, and certainly not what I want our future to be. Biden, I saw him on television the other night, and he made it very clear to George Stephanopoulos that he wants people in south of the border who want to seek asylum to the United States to stay home. He was pretty explicit about that. And yesterday, Secretary Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary, told Congress, Our goal is safe, legal, and orderly immigration that is based on our bedrock priorities to keep our borders secure, address the plight of children as the law requires, and enable families to stay together. And Biden has issued this executive order, and essentially he said, securing our borders does not require us to ignore the humanity of those who seek to cross them. We are both a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants. To me, that's what this country ought to be. It's certainly the country my father escaped to from the pogroms of Eastern Europe about 100 years ago.
Hey, Al, I'd like to stay with you. Only a few years ago, people joked that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin should find a room someplace because of their perceived love affair. But just yesterday, President Biden agreed with a statement that the Russian leader was a murderer. And I've heard presidents condemn Russian leaders before, but these seems to take these hostilities to a whole new level. I know that they recalled their ambassador yesterday. What do you think of the political calculation coming from the Biden team on this and going after Vladimir Putin?
Well, when Donald Trump was asked the question about Putin being a murderer, he said, Americans kill people too. Look, relations are maybe become a little more strained between the Russians and the Americans, and they probably ought to. I think Biden knows Putin. He sat down with him. He told Putin he had no soul, and Putin said, "You understand me." So I don't know that there are great political calculations, but Biden knows what he's doing. Biden's no novice to foreign policy, but. This week we just had a report from the intelligence community about how the Russians interfered with our with our 2020 election, how they used Trump allies, and who knows whether Trump himself, but it's pretty clear that they're referring to Rudy Giuliani as a pawn in their effort to try to influence the election to help Donald Trump. The Russians aren't acting as our friend, and it's good for me to see a president who's on America's side in this battle.
Greg, what are your thoughts on that?
I certainly agree with the points Al made. I had an amazing opportunity when I worked with then Vice President Bush to travel to over 60 countries around the world. And one of the things that always, took me a little by surprise sometimes is how Americans really think people in other places of the world are kind of like us. They must think like us. They must have values common to ours. They must look at the world through a similar kind of set of eyes. But that's not the case. And I think that Biden did something very wise in being very clear and very out front that Putin has an entirely different agenda. At the simplest level, it's kind of a philosophy that Russia can only do well if the US does poorly. And he sets about in every way possible to ensure that that's the case. And of course, it's not just Putin. He was trained in this school of thought as a KGB agent. He now sits atop a massive organization that either falls in line with his view, which is this view, or they don't exist, either literally or figuratively, in his government. And I think as Americans we have underestimated how seriously and intentionally Putin seeks to undermine the values that we have here, the work that we do around the world in support of peace and freedom. Again, on this philosophy that if we're doing well, he's not. And so if he can throw sand in the gears of America, somehow Russia will do better. It's an entirely different kind of a view of the world that from what we have. And I think that in a way, while he reminded Americans what the situation is, he put Putin and he put those within Russia who may begin to be willing to challenge Putin on notice that we're just not going to take this, that we know who you are, we know what you're up to, and we're not going to accept it, and many throughout the world are not going to accept it. So I thought with a very short phrase, he actually delivered a pretty powerful image. And if Putin ever had any doubts that the playing field has changed for him with Trump out and Biden in, I think he no longer has any doubt.
We'll have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks so much. See you next time.